Welcome back to the David Kurten Show. I'm David Kurten. This is today's News Talk, TNT, and I'm delighted to have with me again Lewis Brackpool, the independent journalist. And he was here with me as my very first guest last week when I started the show. Lewis, welcome back to Central London.
Thank you very much for having me. It's really good to be here. Thanks, David.
Great to see you. And this is an important day, obviously, because we're here because of the trial of Julian Assange. Yes. Well, I mean, the ongoing debacle, I would say. It's not a trial because he hasn't actually done anything wrong, but they're deciding whether to extradite him to the USA or not. But you've been around, you've been here for a few hours, you've been looking around.
Yeah.
Can you describe the scenes outside the Royal Courts of Justice?
Yeah, the first thing I noticed was it's great to see so many people from the left and the right side of politics as well, all coming together for a non-partisan issue. I think that's so important. I think it's great to just see so many different people here. I mean, as an independent journalist myself, when you go to these events, it's so important that so many people sort of come together and, tackle these kind of issues head on. So initially, it's been a great sort of atmosphere outside, despite the circumstances. But the first thing I did notice was that there are so many different people here as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that affects all of us because this is about free speech. Yes. And if free speech goes, everybody is affected. And you've got now someone being pushed through the justice system, which I used to believe in, but this has shaken my faith in the justice system, enormously because of what they're doing. He's an innocent man, and he's been pushed through. I mean, if he does get extradited to America, God forbid, what do you think the consequences will be for society?
I think it sets a dangerous precedent. You've got an Australian citizen publishing or doing journalism, proper journalism in Europe, and then having the US step in to prosecute him. And I think that sets a dangerous precedent personally. As an independent journalist myself, it actually terrifies me, the idea of a journalist being put behind bars completely. And I think it's going to really make things difficult in the future. Now, in the UK alone, we have a really dire situation with regards to freedom of speech and expression and freedom of the press. And I hate to say this, I have a very bad feeling about what's going to be happening. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm totally wrong. But I think it sets a dangerous precedent for people that are coming into journalism, coming into the media scene, that want to expose corruption, want to expose the awful things that Western governments and governments beyond that have been doing for the past however many years. I mean, for the past 3 years, it's really opened people up to corruption. We've seen, of course, I mean, we met at the Freedom Rallies originally, had various interviews together, and this set me on a path to really home in on corruption and just to bring that to light. And if this happens, where Julian Assange does get extradited, like I said, it sets a very dangerous precedent for people everywhere. There are still some journalists as well. I'm not going to name names necessarily, but there are some journalists in the Neocon sphere that still are against Assange with this situation, which I think is totally wrong. It's totally awful. But like I said earlier, it's good to see that so many people here as well are coming together to speak about this grave issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's people across the political spectrum from all walks of life, from all, socioeconomic groups. Absolutely. Yes. But the neocons, and that is a very interesting word you use, because you think that they're on the right, as I would be, and, I'm for freedom. But they are really for war. They make money from supporting the military-industrial complex. What they want to do is get our nations, take positions of power, and get us fighting wars all over the place. They were responsible for getting us to war in Iraq, which everyone saw there was absolutely no need to do this. It was done on a lie. Two lies, actually. They told people in America that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11, which he wasn't. They told the people in the UK he had weapons of mass destruction. All of those both were lies. And then they've got us to war with Libya and Syria, and now there's Middle Eastern things going on. These people are dangerous, and they're masquerading as people who are on our side.
Well, I agree. And it fits the bill, really, doesn't it? Because it's the people that side with the military-industrial complex, and what what Julian Assange was doing was exposing the military-industrial complex. So it kind of fits the bill that the neocons, of course, are completely against this. But it's actually disgraceful to see that journalists should have the freedom in order to expose these sorts of wrongdoings. I mean, how can we? That's what a journalist's job is. It's to hold people account. And now we're seeing a completely different shift in the UK, especially, but across the West, with an activist class that's in government, that's in the Westminster bubble, that's in the justice system, and of course the Home Office, everywhere. It's a brand new activist class that looks to undermine freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and the freedoms that we built this country on. So, yeah, like I said, it fits the bill that neocons aren't, of course, supporting Assange, but it's disgraceful and it needs to stop.
You know, in this country, you used to have really good investigative journalists on both sides of the spectrum. I mean, I'm no fan of The Guardian, don't get me wrong, but they used to have some very good investigative journalistic pieces, as did The Telegraph. But, you know, I think the standards in those papers, you know, and other papers in the press have gone down so much. You don't see that anymore. The people doing investigative journalism that really needs to be done are people like Julian Assange. But the inversion that's going on is these press outlets that used to do that are now supporting the government in every possible way.
It's because of that. It's because of that. That's all it is. It's because of money and interest. I mean, once again, I don't want to necessarily name names, but there are outlets out there that have backed funding from big pharmaceutical companies, for example. So when you want to run a story about, let's say, the heart dart, for example, if you want to run a story about that and get it through the mainstream media, or you want to talk about SSRIs or anything to do with medicine, there will be mainstream outlets that will completely avoid this because of financial interests in certain avenues, such as big pharmaceutical companies. So when that starts to intertwine with journalism and media and people being bought out in that respect, it sets a very, very awful precedent for freedom, the right to express, and of course, the press in general. I mean, to be completely owned and to change the narrative because of, envelopes is terrible. We shouldn't be having that. It's awful.
Absolutely. We'll hold that thought there. That was very good. We need to reestablish freedom of the press and make sure that they're free in every way. We're just going to go to a break now. We'll be back after the news. This is the David Kurten Show, today's News Talk TNT. Welcome back to the David Kurten Show with today's News Talk TNT. And we're outside the Royal Courts of Justice today, covering the trial of Julian Assange. Now, we've been here, I've been talking to Lewis Brackpool, who is an independent journalist, and it's great to have you on the show, Lewis. Now, you're an independent journalist. How does this affect you specifically? Because Julian Assange, you could say, in some measures, was an independent journalist. He wasn't working for an establishment outlet or a mainstream outlet. I mean, how does this actually affect you personally as a journalist?
It's a good question. I think earlier we were talking about precedents, and that patterns are set over the course of decades when it comes to media, when it comes to journalism in general. And there's been a rise of citizen journalism as well, especially across the West. And how this will affect us in the future will be very simple. If Julian Assange gets extradited because of what he has done, in terms of exposing the military-industrial complex, it will wean off journalists from actually being courageous, going out there, trying to find sources and trying to, of course, expose what is happening. I mean, I've covered, of course, the topic of Ukraine a lot. We've spoken about this extensively. And people or journalists in general should feel comfortable enough to go out and to find sources and to get news from wherever that may be. And it just sets a very, very scary precedent for anyone who wants to take up journalism and not just be part of a corporation where they feed you on what they want you to go out and find. Whereas a journalist should be independently free-minded and be able to go out and actually source news and try to find out the truth. And the truth sometimes doesn't go your way. And I think that's incredibly important. So this sets a very dangerous precedent if this Julian Assange being extradited happens.
Yeah, I mean, citizen journalists are so important, and they've sprung up like as a whole new class of people and reporter, doing amazing work, especially over the last 4 years with the lockdown period. I went to a lot of the freedom rallies. You interviewed me many times walking along the roads in London, just out here and other places. No, that's all right. It was great because you got the message out. Right. You see, you were doing amazing work as a citizen journalist for 4 years, and many, many other people were that we know as well. I mean, it's so important to have people that are not part of a mainstream outlet, because these people, they accuse us of disinformation and misinformation, whatever that means, when actually they're putting out misinformation themselves. And they're saying that these injections, which I noticed you called the heart dart, is a good name, but these experimental injections were safe and effective. And they repeated that mantra over and over again. And it was citizen journalists, independent commentators who challenged that narrative and actually spoke the truth. And if they hadn't, we might still be in lockdown.
Absolutely.
We might have everybody being forced to take an injection, unless we wouldn't be able to travel or come and sit in a bar like we are today.
Exactly.
Just like they tried to do 3 or 4 years ago. So what you're doing is so important. It's difficult though, isn't it? I mean, or is it easy? How would you get into doing that if you want to do it?
It's a great question. I think there's other things as well that are on its way. About the online safety bill. A lot of people are very aware of this regulation that's moving from broadcast all the way over to the internet. Looks to regulate people's social media posts and beyond. So that's why citizen journalism is so important, B, completely under attack, because the powers that be can see that people with just a camera phone can go out and shoot and get the truth or get what's happening on the ground or get a feel of what's happening in a particular situation. So that's why it's so important. To get into it, very easy. Start up a social media account, get yourself a phone, and just go out and shoot. That's literally it. You don't have to put your opinion to anything. I try not to as much as possible, although I do like to, give my opinion on various subjects, obviously. But you don't have to give an opinion. You can go out, shoot, tell people what you are seeing, to paint the picture for them at home and for them to follow what you're doing. And I think it's so incredibly important and easier. It's as easier as ever now to become a journalist, which is, I would argue it's a trade as opposed to like a profession. But it's as easy as ever now to become one, and I recommend anyone who has an interest in it to just go out and do it. Well,
I mean, I've done that for a couple of years. I mean, I'm not as a journalist, but as a commentator. Some people are familiar with my YouTube channel. I've been I just sit in my room in front of a flag and just pontificate for a few minutes every day. And so, some people like to listen, and I get lots of comments one way or the other. It's interesting, but we had one of the really interesting things over the last 3 years, which was completely new, is you had channels on YouTube that were just filming for 5 or 6 hours, no comment. That Subject Access, I think, was one of the first, and Resistance GB. You were doing similar things, and that was so interesting. It was a completely new sort of genre, if you like, that just sprung up, but they didn't like it. The powers that be were frightened of that. And they tried to close them down. And all they were doing was filming in real time what was going on. I mean, they've got to be completely paranoid to be frightened of someone just filming what is going on in the public space, haven't they?
Well, that viewership on broadcasts like the BBC, ITV, sorry to name names, Sky News, and various others, their viewership is going down, it's tanking, because people now more than ever are sort of going, I don't actually want to watch TV now. I can easily access, YouTube, Rumble, social media, and you can actually get your news now from all sources, and you can have a look everywhere to try and find that. So no wonder they're so keen to push through something like the online safety bill, which brings in more regulation onto the internet from the broadcasting arena. So you can see the paranoia in real time. You can see why they're so keen to just push that through. So the answer to that really is more citizen journalism, really.
Yeah.
It's more journalism. It's less Ofcom regulation, and it's more getting out there and trying to source truth.
I mean, I was always a very law-abiding citizen. I was brought up to be law-abiding. I was brought up to believe in the goodness of the courts, of the government, the police, and so on. But these years, with something like the online safety bill, I mean, it's draconian, it's tyrannical.
Yeah.
They're trying to regulate not just broadcasters, which I think are over-regulated anyway. I mean, my opinion is they should not have to be impartial. They should be allowed to take a position like they are in the USA. Broadcasters in the USA, they've got First Amendment rights. They can say what they like. They can be partisan. They can to either a political party or to an ideology or to a policy. But here in the UK, you've got this beast that has been built called Ofcom that is imposing impartiality. But what that does, it's not really impartial. It basically enforces the broadcasters to toe the government line, to toe the line that the establishment want you to have. So if you go against that, you get cancelled. It's very, very frightening. Well, my point is here is that, as well as that, now the online safety bill is also trying to regulate the internet, which up to now has not been regulated. I mean, it is a space of freedom, and you do get people on there doing bad things. You do get people on there using it in a way which, I don't like. But, that's the cost of freedom in a way. But, you shouldn't punish everybody because there's 1% of people who are doing something wrong. And that's what they want to do.
I agree.
And that's very frightening.
This nation was built on a battle of ideas originally. And to see it fall to where free speech only means, well, only I can say this or you can't say that, is really, not to get too emotional about it, but it really frustrates me to see that, because freedom, in terms of freedom of expression, religious rights and everything, is for all. It's for everyone, even people that you really disagree with or hate. They deserve that right as much as you do. And unfortunately, we live in a very secular country now, where people's egos, people's I'm just gonna use the word ego. People's egos are so out of control that they think that freedom of speech only can apply to them and not the people that they claim to oppose. Like I said, we're built on a nation of ideas, and the market dictates good ideas and bad ideas. If a bad idea comes along, you battle that with good ideas, better ideas, and that's how it should be. And if there happens to be an idea that you don't like, then tough, battle for it, battle for a better idea. Battle for a better idea. And like I said, secular Britain has really ruined the idea of freedom of expression and speech, because now it's getting out of control. It's spiraling out.
I mean, a lot of this goes back to Herbert Marcuse. I don't know if you've heard of him, if you're watching, but he's a cultural Marxist. He wrote in the 1950s and 1960s, but he wrote a paper called Repressive Tolerance, which was all about changing society so that what they wanted, that side, would be tolerated, but what they didn't agree with would be repressed. So there is tolerance for what you want, but intolerance for anything else. So it's not an open marketplace of ideas anymore. You've got the Overton window, if you like, which is related, and you can say whatever you like within this very small area. But if you say something outside of it, that's you do not tolerate that. What disturbs me at the moment is I'm actually seeing that not just on the left, but to some extent on the right as well. And with the neocons that you mentioned, do you notice that happening as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think both sides are abandoning their morality. They're abandoning, and I'm not saying everyone. I'm saying there are certain sects on both sides that are abandoning their principles. And when it comes to freedom of speech and expression, when something that comes along that they don't like, they then sort of go, oh, but I can't defend that in case I might get cancelled, or I might, you know, this person might not like me anymore, or I might get a job with another media firm or anything like that. People need to abandon this thinking and say, look, consistency goes a long way as a journalist, as a media pundit, as a presenter, as everything. If you remain consistent, you will get better results, and you'll keep that momentum going in that respect. So, yeah, it's a shame.
Consistency is very important, but it's also important to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with you on everything. I mean, you know, I pretty much agree with you on everything.
I don't think there's anything that we disagree.
We agree on everything, absolutely. You know, but there's people I've had on the show, and it's really nice to talk to them. But we would agree on some things, and we talk about them, but we wouldn't agree on other things. But it's important to still talk to people, even if you disagree with them,
and with respect.
Yeah, and with you know, and you can say, rather than you know, you get some channels and some debates, and you know, I've been on shows like this. They have a presenter, then they have a right-wing person, they have a left-wing person, and they try to get you arguing, and they think it's great if one of them like gets in a massive huff and storms out of the studio. And it's like, okay, that's good television, but
that's not ideas.
No,
that's not a battle of ideas, is it? It's just a shouting match for clicks.
So it's much better if you can, you know, find people that you do have different ideas with, and then you can talk to each other, and you know. And, you know, coming back to Julian Assange, because obviously this is what we're here for today, and this is why we're in central London. You know, you might not like what he says. I do. I think he's done a fantastic job in exposing people in the deep state. But even if you don't like what he says, you should support his freedom of speech. And we do hope that he will be set free this week. Thank you for joining me on the David Kurten Show. This is today's News Talk, TNT.